I think this is a very timely book, given that we are yet again in a protracted war in a foreign country. So I think it's a tremendous choice for the big read this year. And I hope that those of you who have had a chance to read it will join us in our discussion a little bit later in the evening. Tim O'Brien has said, "Wars don't end when you sign peace treaties or when the years go by. They will echo until I'm gone and all the widows and orphans are gone." The Vietnam War has certainly echoed in Tim O'Brien's life, and through his writing, he has over and over again tried to wrest meaning from his experience. He was born in 1946 in Minnesota, and he describes himself as a kid who hated Boy Scouts, bugs, and rifles. Nevertheless, he was drafted in 1969. He was sent to Vietnam. Is it Quang Ngai? Is that how you pronounce it?
Quang Ngai.
Quang Ngai province. He was an infantryman. He was wounded, decorated, and sent home. And within 3 years, he was writing about it. His first book was a memoir, and it was called "If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Send Me Home," which sounds a little light for what his experience was. He was very haunted by his Vietnam experience. That was not enough, writing a memoir. In 1978, he wrote a book called Going After Cacciato. Has anybody here read that? It's a very different book. It's a novel, and it's, I would say, very surreal. It's actually about a soldier, Cacciato, who goes AWOL and plans to walk 6,000 miles to the Paris peace talks. Or does he? And about the squad who goes after him. Or do they? I would say the style of it reflects a comment by Paula Prescott, who wrote in the Newsweek, "Messy wars, like the one we fought in Vietnam, lend themselves more readily to a fragmented narrative." So in 1990, 20 years now, he's still writing about Vietnam. 20 years later, after he left, he wrote The Things They Carried. And this time, he attempted to resolve the paradox of trying to tell the truth about an experience that is inherently slippery, ambiguous, foggy, unreal. So he blurs the boundaries between fiction and truth, memory and truth, stories and truth, because those confusions and contradictions mirror the war itself. And so the very process of writing and remembering, imagination and memory, is as central to the book as the soldiers he loves so much. In a sense, O'Brien's imagination becomes the only reality in the book. It's now 40 years since O'Brien left Vietnam, 20 years since he wrote The Things They Carried, and the book is enjoying a very timely resurgence of interest. We hope that, along with O'Brien, that our discussion tonight will, in his own words, open doors to conversation through art. I am thrilled to introduce my panel. We are very fortunate to have all of them with us. And what I'm going to do, so you understand the trajectory of the evening, I'm going to ask each panelist a question. And I would like them to have a chance to maybe spend 5 minutes or so answering it. And then we will open up to the wider audience and hope that you will join us in our discussion. So first I'm going to introduce them. Gail Woodside, to my left, of Seekonk, is a former Marine who served in Vietnam from 1965 to 66 and in other theaters from 1987 to 91. He received his doctorate in American History and Education from LaSalle University, and in 1992 he created a course devoted to Vietnam, which he taught in Seekonk High School and Rhode Island College. Gil has been DAR American History Teacher of the Year, both locally and on a state level. He is founder and president of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation. For those of you in the audience who remember Martha Ray, I don't know, I think a few of you, right. Ask him afterwards about his connection to Martha Ray. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And now to my right, to my far right, Tom Burns, a native of Brooklyn and a self-described dreaded Yankee fan.
Thank you.
We hope that does not influence your responses to Tom or your questions. He majored in history at Brooklyn College. He served stateside in the U.S. Army from 1969 to 71, and then went on to become a periodontist. Since 1987, Tom has been staff periodontist at the Boston VA Medical Center, where he has treated and talked with a number of vets, treated periodontally, a number of vets with PTSD. He and his friend John really recently made a trip to Washington, D.C., where they did tracings on the Vietnam Memorial. And I'm sure many of you have been there. If you have not, it's such a powerful and moving experience if you have the opportunity to go to Washington. Amy Rillinger, to my right, will be representing the generation not yet born during Vietnam. As assistant children's librarian and facilitator of a young parents group here, Amy brings a unique perspective to our discussion. For the Big Read, she's been working with middle school students who are reading a book called Shooting the Moon. It's a story of a military family during Vietnam. Amy says she never thought she would spend so much time in veterans' offices and discovering military memorabilia and enjoying it so much. And finally, Marion Volterra, who's probably very recognizable to many of you for her many civic and community involvements, the creative genius she displays in the Attleboro Arts Museum gift shop and its annual flower show. And she also owns the Eclectic Company in Wellfleet, Mass. Tonight, more importantly, Marion is a founding, insightful, and active member of the Gourmet Readers Book Club. So welcome to Marion. And I would like to begin our questions tonight with Gil. Gil, what did you carry into the war? What did you carry out of it, both negative and positive? And having read the book now so many years later, what do you carry away from the book?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, yeah, excuse me.
I didn't study for this, you know. Jeez. Well, I think I've always referred to myself as the Richie Cunningham of Seekonk when I went off to the Marines. I was a great kid. So going into the war, I brought a real innocence with me. The most violent thing I'd ever seen was my puppy getting hit by a car. So as a 19-year-old kid, I had just turned 20 actually, went off to Vietnam in the first 3 months of the war. President Johnson, at the end of February, said he was going to commit American combat units to the fight, and the first Marine units, first actual combat units in Vietnam were the Marine units that landed at Da Nang in March, and I landed a little bit later than that. I landed the last week of April at a place that didn't even exist called Chu Lai. And again, I brought this innocence that I saw all these John Wayne movies, and at the end of the movie, all the actors got up, brushed off all the fake blood, and they went home and collected their big paychecks. Well, in Vietnam, that didn't happen. And probably the most vivid memory I have of Vietnam is I guess it was about 3 or 4 days after we were there, there was a probe, a hit, or a small patrol that had gone out. We got word that a chopper was coming in and they were wounded on it. And so those of us who weren't doing some type of duty at that time, our job was to go to the small helipad and take off the wounded. And that very first thing that I saw in Vietnam that was violent was a young Marine my age that we had to carry off who was still alive. And that's what I also brought back with me, is that I don't know if that kid lived or not. But we took him off. He had his intestines blown out. They were in the hands of a corpsman. I didn't know what they were until somebody told me what they were. I didn't know. And that stayed with me. That's one of the things I brought back with me from Vietnam. Out of all that innocence I went with, I brought something like that back. And that has stayed with me. It has stayed with me for a very long time. It used to be very frequent that I dreamt about that. I got out of Vietnam on June 12th of 1966. So I've been out for a very long time. And over the years, that has gone back somewhere into my sea bag in my mind somewhere, and I put the lock on it. It only creeps out every now and then. It crept out while I read this book. I read the book, and it brought back so much to me because his area of operation was my area of operation. The places he talked about, Arizona Territory, Indian Territory, Marble Mountain, Monkey Mountain, I was there. I knew what they were. And as I was reading his book, I envisioned all of that. And it brought me all the way back to that. Thinking about the book, thinking about what I carried in Vietnam, and he's right, that green towel was always there. Much later on, the Marines didn't have those green towels. That was something that came in a little bit later on in the war. Again, I was there from 65 to 66. A lot of things changed by the time that Tim got to Vietnam. But they carried things that meant something to them. I carried a scapula, a green scapula that my uncle carried when he landed in Normandy. He gave me that. And I always had it in my left breast pocket. I carried that. I wouldn't go anywhere without that. I also had, I wish I could remember it. It's very short, but it's called a soldier's prayer. And he gave me that also. And I would carry that. Other than that, you really didn't want to bring too much personal stuff with you because if you got captured, they'd find out a lot of stuff about you and they'd use it against you. So I didn't want to bring a picture of my brand new bride of 54 days that I left at home. And one of the things I brought back from Vietnam was the casualty of my first marriage. It wasn't because I was a jerk. It was just because we had been separated for 15 months within the first 54 or 60 days of our marriage. And I came home. I didn't think I was significantly different. My mother said I was cold. My wife said I was cold. I didn't see it. So that's the thing I brought back. Reading the book, there are so many things in this book that hit home to me. The things they carried, to me, and from my own personal experience, was the whole idea of the individualistic idea of war. War is a group effort, but it's so individual. It's so individual. You're next to these guys, and you're all a part of a group, and you're all depending on one another, but right here and there, you're the guy. So it's an individual thing. So that really got me. Talking about the morbid humor in the book, there was a lot of that. That's one of the ways we survived, was the morbid humor. He didn't die. He bought the farm. He bit the dust. He got dusted. And that's why the helicopters, medevac helicopters, were called dust-offs. The piece in here, the destruction of the village. Most of you would say how cruel and how unnecessary that was. Yeah, it was, and I agree with you. However, I can relate to that in a very, close manner, simply because we'd go through a village, they'd all be waving at us, U.S. #1, we love you, Marine #1, ha ha ha. You would come back, you might walk across booby traps. You might get shot at. So I know that we had a couple of our guys killed out on a patrol. We weren't on that patrol that day, but we prayed that they would attack our base that night so we could take retribution against them. So when this thing happened with the destruction of the village, though I think it's wrong, I understood it. And I think it's hard for someone who's never been in that position to understand something like that. That how could you do that? It's hard, but You know, in Vietnam, just as in Iraq right now and Afghanistan, children were killing us. Women with babies were killing us. So sometimes, you know, discretion is kicked out by survival. And that's how it has to be. Or you don't come home. You know, put me in the box and send me home. That's what it would be, you know. I'm just popping through this stuff. He talks about valor and courage. Frightened. That was for all of us. The idea that you would become a coward was worse than being killed. The idea that you wouldn't carry your weight when the stuff hit the fan, that you would freeze, that you would run, that you would hide, was worse than being killed, because that fear, you let your brothers down. And that, he writes about that, and you just couldn't do that. And the thing that got me, and I told you this when we talked, the tunnel routine. Now, when reading this, and I wrote this just like this, when reading the tunnel passage, I felt this fear because I knew if I had to go down, if I had drawn number 17, I may have become a coward. I'm claustrophobic. But could I have done that to the rest of my guys? It was my turn to do that. Would I have to have swallowed my claustrophobia? So there's always that battle. Am I going to be brave? Am I going to be a coward? Am I going to do what I'm supposed to do, or am I not going to do what I'm supposed to do? Am I going to chicken out? And that was the greatest thing in the world, that disgrace in front of your brothers. It was something I know I couldn't have lived with. I could never have lived with that, because that was the thing that kind of kept you going. The brotherhood, the trust of one another. Like, one of the things I brought back from Vietnam, I had never had a prejudiced bone in my body, but I did bring back a great understanding that once you've ever faced crisis like that, racism or hatred for religion or anything else, after sharing an experience like that, is an absolutely asinine attitude to have. Because I knew the black kid from Detroit would come and risk his life to save me. The Native American kid would. The Puerto Rican kid from New York would. We all knew each other would do that for one another. There was no color line. The stuff you read about Vietnam, about the race stuff going on, that happened very late in the war. I didn't see it there. And I brought that back, and I'm glad I brought that back. What I brought back is a love of all humanity. I brought back a love of life. And the idea that, man is man's inhumanity to man. That's how I always taught it. And it happens to be a fact of life. I don't know how you get rid of war. I just don't know how you do it. When he burned Martha's letters and all of that kind of stuff, that was pretty tough too. But he realized something, that Martha was writing letters of an obligation style. I have to write you that I'm happy with you and all this kind of stuff for a long time because you're in a bad situation. Well, reading that, and I also shared this with you, all the while I was in Vietnam, my dad would write me every single week. Oh, the family's great, things are going, this is that, blah, 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 okay? And I was happy. I was hearing from my dad. I was hearing from my mom and all that kind of stuff. Little did I know that within a very short time of leaving for Vietnam, my father abandoned my 5 brothers, my 4 brothers, my sister, and my mother. But he was writing all this good stuff. So when I read this about in Tim O'Brien's book, I cried for a while. Because that struck me like, he's right. He hit the button right on hit the nail right on the head. He's telling me stuff that I know, stuff that happened to me. And those were, that was a tremendous thing. Shut me up when you're ready.
Well, I mean, you have such wonderful things
Well,
to
I'm
share, but
I'm sure that we can
but we'll
talk about
probably
this
have
during the discussion,
opportunity
yeah.
later, so I think, thank you, Gil. It's very, very much appreciated. I'm going to pass this I'm going to first ask Tom Burns. I thought of you specifically for during two chapters of the book. One was The Dentist. And the other was Speaking of Courage, which takes place post-Vietnam when Norman Bowker comes home to his little town in Iowa, and he feels like an outsider, and he's driving around and around the lake in deep contrast to the way he left his friend Kiowa in the excrement of Vietnam. And he feels tremendous guilt, despite the fact that it seems he's been awarded many, many medals. And after 3 years, he can't create any meaning for his life, and he eventually commits suicide. So I know that you have had probably not just Vietnam vets, but other vets who have come in with PTSD, who may react in certain ways either to dentistry or to conversation or whatever. So if you could share your reflections on those two chapters or anything else in the book you'd like to, Tom.
Okay.
There isn't a seat right here. So you wouldn't have to stand up.
You can behave yourself. All right. You know, with the introduction tonight, you said there's a panel of experts, and obviously there's one expert on Vietnam on the panel. Like everybody else is going to chime in, but, you know, thank you, Gil, for your service. But, like, I was an expert on having a 2S from 1965 to 1969. That was a college student, got a deferment 2S. And then my 2S ran out in 69, and I got my 1A. And then, you know, I wound up enlisting for OCS, and I was in the Army for 2 years, but I never got any closer to Vietnam than Fort Leonard Wood, which was known as Little Korea. So, like, I was safe the whole time. And, you know, so I'm no expert. I'm an expert maybe a little bit on the Army for a couple of years in that period of time. And I know how the draft affected Army morale and all of that, and the difference between the lifer and the draftee. But the only reason I agreed to come on the panel is because I've been treating Vietnam vets and other vets for the last almost 25 years. And it just seems like most of us have this impression of the greatest generation, the World War II vet, and all they've done for us and all that. But in my opinion, they almost had it easy. And I'm not denigrating their service one iota, but compared to what the Vietnam vet went through, the World War II vet was hailed as a hero. They came home. They were given a GI Bill that was very generous. It was a great idea, and it was good for them, and it was good for the country. And within about 10 years, they had taken over the country. The Vietnam vet came home to a totally different reality, and they've been living that reality for the last, like, 40 years or so. And I just figured this was an opportunity to come and give a shout-out or whatever to the Vietnam vets and to thank them for their service. As far as the two chapters go, the dentist, that that was probably my least favorite chapter in the book, and it had nothing to do with the dentist either. Just you know, oh please, but it was you know. I asked around. I said, did anything like this ever happen? So, like, obviously, this is more of the, you know, again, the problem with the book, not the problem, whatever, but the complexity of the book is this work of fiction. So it's, you know, you start getting into, you know, what's going on. And I thought the point that he was trying to make in there was kind of shallow for the book. The rest of the book works at such a high level, especially that first chapter, the things they carried. I think that's one of the greatest things I've ever read in my life. The other chapter, as far as the relating to PTSD, I thought that was a really great chapter. You know, going around in circles and you know, not being able to communicate, and that I think is one of the biggest problems that the vets had. Not just the Vietnam vets, the World War II vets as well, being able to talk about their war experience. And a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of the vets that I've talked to, I've said to them, when was the first time you were able to really talk about the war? What you did there. And so many of them said, like Vietnam era vets said, within the last 4 or 5 years. And you think of how long it's been over, and they've only first now come out with it. And as far as being proud of being in Vietnam, that's probably only come in the last 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, a lot of them tell me when they went for a job interview and they said they were in the service, and the guy said, well, where'd you serve? They say, Germany. They'd try to get that out. They wouldn't even let them know, like, where they were. Now, can you picture a World War II vet saying, I never left the States, if they had been over with Patton's army? I can't see that, But, like I've seen lots of vets with PTSD from all wars. Right. And it's not just peculiar to Vietnam. I think some of the ambiguity of the war makes it maybe a little more prevalent because, there weren't people in gray uniforms and brown uniforms. There was just, you didn't really know where it was coming from. So they have, maybe some more mistakes were made or whatever, and, but the patients, I was telling you the other night, like situations like in a dental chair, I mean, what I do sometimes causes bleeding, especially if you don't floss. So, so everybody, all right, anyway. So, but there were 1 or 2 vets that really would get kind of flipped out, like if they got blood in their mouth, because they had a head wound and they had blood in their mouth, and that just brought that back. And a lot of vets have an anniversary day, like a day when something bad happened to them. It could have been when they got wounded or whatever. And a lot of times they'll just go off. I mean, go off like to a place like Northampton, and kind of like just be with other vets, like, within the VA facility for a 2-week period, and just kind of lay low until that period passes, and then they go back to their normal life and all. So anyway, that's my intro, and thanks.
Great, thank you.
Time for the younger generation to chime in.
I love being called down.
So I wonder if you could tell us about some of your experiences introducing middle schoolers to veterans,
Okay.
what they're, and I assume possibly some of these kids have parents who are serving now. And I don't know if that's the case. And also, as book club facilitator, what, as you look at it, as a young person now reading this book, what is the take-home message for you and perhaps this generation?
First off, I think that the middle schoolers introduced me to the war stories and to the veterans. There's one particular young man in Attleboro who said to me, Mrs. Rillinger, if you want boys to come into the library, you need to talk about war stories. And so when this book was chosen for the big read, I was, great, here we go. And, I had been emailing him, and he'd been coming into the library. Did you read this one yet? Did you read this one yet? I was like, no. I've been reading the flaps, I've been reading reviews, but war stories are not my particular thing. And so we decided to get veterans to come in so that the kids could get at that perspective of the real war stories. And talk about being nervous. Like we have our little peace symbol on our car outside, and I have a first grade son who is told on a daily basis, you need to use your words. Talk about contradictions, and we do Veterans Day, and these are heroes, but we don't want you to be one of those. Remarkable, and going into the veterans' offices and saying, hi, can you come tell kids about the war? Remarkable, just wonderful stories, wonderful. I would be happy to educate these kids. I would be happy to share with you, that they said things like, just because you see someone all in camouflage and all armied up, they're not condoning war. They are remembering their friends who may have died. They are remembering their loved ones who fought in any war, and it was really eye-opening. And then the kids came in, and they called me before the book discussion to say, can we give presentations? and the kids volunteered for this stuff. This was not assignments. This was not extra credit. They love these stories. They have been researching strategies. They have favorite generals. We were blown away by one of them actually read Shooting the Moon, a bunch of the other war stories, and he read The Things They Carried. It really taught me a lot about what these kids, I don't want my baby son reading about war and all the horrible things that happened, but it was fantastic. So that's the middle schooler aspect of it. You had mentioned talking the art and stories. We're doing a photo workshop. Shooting the Moon involves undeveloped film being sent home from Vietnam to tell a story. And so some of the kids are learning about photography from professional photographers, people from Attleboro donating their time to be a part of the Big Read, which is another great thing about the Big Read. The Parents Book Club, some of them are in the audience. We have not yet discussed the book. We're discussing it tomorrow. We definitely had some concern when we were reading some dark stories in our regular schedule of books, and we said, a war story, how are we going to do this? That's pretty depressing. And it's true, a lot. But then I've also had women come up to me who haven't been able to come to a book discussion of ours in a long time and said, have you read this book? It's poetry. And are coming tomorrow night. So that's fantastic. I printed out a message before I came here. One of the book club members picked it up, and her message starts out, have you started this? Okay, I'm on page 11, and I am riveted. I already have 2 pages earmarked for discussion. I'm afraid I'll end up being a one-man show at the next book club. These are the things that she likes so far. Now, she's on page 11. The young man in love at war, the description of their jobs and what they do, because it's not at all unlike what my father describes when he talks about being in the front lines in Korea. And what they actually carried is very significant to me in the oddest way. And she goes on to say that her brother has a degree in textile engineering and how that related to government. It's just one story, and you could talk all night about the writing and the experiences and Tim O'Brien, but the fabulous thing about the Big Read for me is that I've heard so many stories, all different stories from, some of the moms who come to story time are veterans. One woman in particular, I've known, our sons were in baby story time together. She's a veteran of the Israeli army. Never would have thought to even talk about that with someone you're picking out early readers with or showing them where the diaper changing station is. It's really been fantastic. So.
Opened up a lot of worlds to you. Thank you, Amy. Marian, your turn. Just one sec. Tim O'Brien deliberately confuses the reader by having himself as narrator, character, and author. And some people have found this annoying. Others have found it confusing. I'm wondering how that approach was for you. Did it lead you deeper into the story? Did it enhance the experience for you? Or tell us a little bit about your experience of that.
Well, this is not really my field of expertise, but I love to read, and I've really enjoyed our book club, and was very flattered that Kathy offered to let me be on this panel. And I think the Big Read is such a great thing to have in Attleboro. I was really moved by this book, and I think it was partly due to the style that Tim O'Brien used. By using 20-something short stories, he manages to have them meshed together and form a sort of novel that conveyed all of the emotions, I think, of the war. The fear, the isolation, bravery, cruelty, confusion, all under horrendous conditions. And he wanted us to believe with our stomach. And I think I believed with my stomach. And he uses all different forms to get us to do that. And I think his use of repetition was very important. He told of an event many times with different recollections, and that to me seemed to reflect the chaos of war. There were so many young people there who they couldn't possibly process the war. And actually, it's silly to say young people, because I don't think any of us could process having a friend die so quickly beside us, or body parts and taking place. And this repetition, it was, I thought, a little bit like a Greek chorus or a country song or a gospel song. And it just kept repeating and repeating from different aspects until you got to really feel it. So, and it was confusing, the whole idea of him as narrator. And one thing that I was very interested in, I think he uses a lot of metaphors and symbols, were the three female roles in the book. You know, I read this book sort of almost like you read poetry, or how I read poetry. I just sort of, washed over it, and then I went back and tried to reread certain things and get a little deeper into it. And the story of Marianne, I thought, was very interesting. At first I couldn't figure out what it was all about. But she is an innocent very innocent 17-year-old who arrives at the war scene in a tight pink sweater and culottes. And she was very brave. She had to be to go, and very curious. And she becomes fascinated with Vietnam. And she talks about how she wanted to be so involved that she wanted to eat Vietnam so she could have it inside her. And she becomes obsessed with the war culture and the Green Berets. And as time passes and she begins to disappear for days on end into the night, she comes back with a necklace of human tongues. And the narrator comments she has crossed to the other side, to the dark side. And as the chapter ends, you get a sense of her in the shadows, and she's actually become a killing machine. And of course, the story is not true, but the use of this symbolism conveys in not very many pages. When you think about how this is not a very big book, and there are so many stories being told and so many emotions that you go through. But here, I think this talks about how these young, inexperienced, innocent people were transformed by war. And I think he uses the extreme of this young woman, a very innocent young woman, as an example to make it even more extreme, to make you really feel how people were transformed. And another example is Norman Bokar going home, which we've already touched about, but I wrote it in my notes here, so I will go through it again. But he felt so guilty about not pleasing his father. His father wanted him to come home with more medals, and he comes home unable to talk about the horrible experience of losing his friend, Kiwa, in this horrible situation. And I think this is symbolism, too. He circles that lake 15 to 20 times, and it's not unlike the field. And it's not unlike Tim O'Brien talking about himself with his daughter going back to the field. And they both, Norman goes in the water, and so does Tim. Tim has to be there. And there's some sort of catharsis and some way to try to process this horrendous experience that they've gone through. He's isolated. He can't communicate with anyone. And you're not that surprised when the suicide happens. And you feel his pain. And I thought it was a very emotional, another very emotional part of the book. So I think the style worked well. I think Tim O'Brien experience of not knowing, I think he makes it very obvious that these stories are not true, but they can be, he had to write story truth and not happening truth. And I think if it were a traditional novel, that you wouldn't have experienced so much because there's a lot more factual, it's a whole different process. And I think it's a powerful book. He said he wrote it so he could try to save himself, which I think he did. He gave us this powerful book and some understanding about serving in a war that most of us have not, and appreciation of what many soldiers have endured.
Thank you, Mary.
Do I get paid extra for this?
Well, currently we have the mic, but we'd be more than happy to bring it out to you. So, having heard the four panelists speak, first I'd just like to ask you if you have any comments about anything you have heard, any questions you would like to address to the panelists, or if you'd like to go into yet another arena of discussion, that would be fine too. Is there another mic, Jim? Or is it?
The audience is fine.
Oh, the audience is fine. Oh, okay. So you don't have to worry about the mic, I guess. And panelists, too, if you would like to say anything about whatever you've heard other panelists speak about, feel free to jump in. Max.
Tom, after Vietnam, we've had other wars. We're currently involved in two. And I'm curious about how the Veterans Administration had dealt with PTSD way back when, and whether they're doing a better job or a different way to treat this condition today.
Oh, good. I'd also like to weigh in on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I'm not here to carry the VA's water, I mean, at all. And, but I do think that in the time that I've been there, that it's gotten better. Not just the VA, but society as a whole. I think anybody that serves in a combat zone, anybody is going to have some form of PTSD, to a greater or lesser extent. They've seen stuff that they wouldn't see like anywhere else, and it's going to affect you. And but they're much better now on screening. When a kid comes back, there's all sorts of screening to be done. Now, you get into the bureaucracy, and some of it is just, let's check this off and check that off and all that. But there are screenings, not just for PTSD, but for traumatic brain injury and all of that, you have to ask questions. You have to say, were you in a combat zone? Were you anywhere near an explosion? Were you anywhere this? Did you see this? Did you see that? Whatever. And then the veteran will say, like, what they saw. And, sometimes even then, they may be, not being totally truthful at the time, forthcoming. And truthful is probably the wrong word to be using here, but not totally forthcoming at the time because of what they've seen. But I think they go out of their way now. I mean, they certainly have enough people on staff to deal with PTSD.
From a perspective of somebody who's lived this, when we first got back from Vietnam, nobody wanted to know who or what we were. Both my mother and father passed away without ever knowing or ever asking a question in Vietnam. You went to the VA, and it was almost like you were trying to steal their money. All they did was pump you with pills to shut you up and keep you quiet. Well, Vietnam vets said, no, you're not going to treat us like that. And as a result, and this was a great thing that I'm very proud of Vietnam vets for, I can remember 15 years ago, I was in a parade, and the Korean War vets turned and called us baby killers. Yeah. And that killed me because all we wanted to do was march with them as brothers. We're warriors. We went and did the same thing. Different war, but we did the same thing. And we suffered the same way. But they called us baby killers. Well, now those same kind of guys are thanking the Vietnam vets for their work in pushing the VA to bring better service to our troops coming home. No troop coming home now will ever suffer the same kind of indignities at the hands of the VA that we did. And I will tell you, when I married my second wife in '87, I told her, I said, if you ever put me in a VA hospital, I will haunt you. I will haunt you till the day you die. Now, I'm a big advocate for the VA hospital. I go there on a regular basis. I get great treatment. I feel they're very much more compassionate to us. So I think the whole picture has changed. Yes.
Anybody else? All right, then I'm going to throw.
I want to just, I enjoyed hearing what Marion had to say about the chapter with the young woman in pink, because that was probably the hardest chapter in the book for me at first too, and I was wondering what Gil's reaction was. I thought Marion did a good job. But I'm curious.
I got to tell you, reading that brought me back to Apocalypse Now. It was like, this is the biggest bunch of crap that was written. Now, there were women in Vietnam who were killers, but they weren't on our side. There was a very famous sniper in the Chu Lai area where Tim served and I served, who actually put prices on American heads. And she was a very, very good sniper. But what Tim wrote just was so ludicrous to me, just so ludicrous, that I didn't even want to finish reading the section because it sounded like something that came out of Hollywood. You know, like, where was the grain of truth in it? I was just looking for some grain of truth. But you kind of touched on it, I think, with you're saying it was the metaphor for the horror of war and how it changes people.
Right.
That might be the one little grain of truth. But I just wanted to take that chapter out of the book and say, Tim, what are you doing? You know? But yes, and I don't know if you have any of the comments. I didn't like it at all.
I went back and read it because I, too, had trouble because it sort of jumps out at you a little bit. And you wonder, it couldn't have possibly happened, and it was so extreme compared to the other incidents. But I went online, I read a lot of things, and I went back and read it again, and it does make an impact that about you talked about you going as such an innocent person, and so many of these people were 18, and everyone, as you said, it was everyone's separate war. Everyone, and when he views things, all these incidents from different perspectives, people come with their own history, their own fears, and handle it very, very differently. And for some very innocent people, they reacted very differently. And I think he used it, the young woman, to make it jump out off the page, to make it more dramatic.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I think he did something else with that. That chapter was so ludicrous to me that I think he points out how ludicrous war is and the activities of war, how ludicrous all of that stuff is, how surreal it is. And I think there you helped me find a grain of truth in that chapter that I didn't see because I was so aggravated with that chapter.
I just like to say one thing about that, too. I really love that chapter. Because it was so surreal. But I think what I liked about it, one of the things Tim O'Brien talks about, and I don't know that this was everybody's experience, but there are people in war who are seduced by the excitement and the adrenaline rush and that feeling of being very, very close to death that makes you feel so terribly alive. And that's one of the things she talked about. She never felt so alive in her life. And interesting question to think about. Somebody at our book club asked the question, when in your life have you had that same feeling? not necessarily that you're close to death, but of feeling something that has made you feel so vibrant and alive that you're practically on fire. And it's just an interesting question to think about. If anybody would like to answer it, feel free. But I just found it, I think he was trying to say, and anybody would expect a guy to experience this, but to have a girl turn from this little 17-year-old Ohio girl in her culottes to, as you said, a killing machine was such a huge, enormous transformation that it made you stand up and think about exactly what you said, Marion. Carol, you had a question.
I just had a comment, two comments. Mary, you just brought up, and Gil, you did too. His whole image of war, when he talks about, I think it was published in the pamphlet, war is death, war is laughter, war is his whole sort of recitation, which was poetry on war. The other thing is, Gil, I was married at the same time for 60 days when my husband went off to Vietnam, and it was 65, 66. And I had an entirely different experience. I had a very supportive community, the Attleboro community actually, who was sort of with me and John's family as he was there for a year. And coming back, we had a very supportive community. But I look at it as, I remember asking John, so what was it like? And he didn't talk about it. It's only now that things are unfolding. But we have pictures, the other comment was, the other thought that I had was, during the Vietnam War, you didn't see what was coming back. It wasn't live. You saw it 24 hours later. It was taped, and it was sent back to you in 65 and 66 over the news. So when I would come home, I was living in Attleboro with John's parents, and when I would come back, I taught school in Attleboro, and when I would come home from school, the news would be on, and the TV would be turned off about Vietnam, because his parents were they wanted to protect me. And I mean, they had their own fears, and I'm their age or older than they were then. So I can relate to how they felt when one of theirs was over there. But I looked at it as, I had such tremendous support, but I was young. I had his family, I had tons of friends. We taped to him. I was taught at Studley School. We sent, the entire school was sending messages, sending popcorn. We sent a pumpkin at Halloween, which he received in March. But he was in a different venue from where you were. He was at Da Nang.
Well, that's that.
And he's here if he wants to come.
Chu Lai is about 37 miles south of Da Nang. And that was our 3rd Marine Division. We were an I Corps, and that Da Nang was where a lot of our headquarters were. That's where our major supply bases were. And we would travel up the highway back and forth to Chu Lai and in Da Nang. I had support of the not so much the community, but of family. They wrote, they sent me cookies and all of that kind of stuff. But coming home was totally different. Not once did my parents ask, not once did my wife ask, not once did my friends ask. When I was on the streets after coming home from Vietnam on my 30-day leave, my buddies would go, "Hey, how you doing?" It was like I just got back from Disney World. They didn't ask about what I did or what the war was like or how are you. It was more like, "Gee, you got a nice tan." Well, of course you got a nice tan in Vietnam, but it just wasn't that. I didn't get any of that. And then going through Providence College was the same thing. I know you're going to laugh at this, but going through Providence College, my hair was down to here. I didn't want anybody to know. I was a Vietnam vet. I didn't. And that piece you talked about not being a Vietnam vet on your resume, it was absolutely the fact. You couldn't get a job if you put Vietnam on it. I taught at Rhode Island College from 1990 to 1997 or 98. And my former Marine Corps commander was the vice president of Rhode Island College. And the guidance director at Seekonk High School asked me to pick up some not recruitment, but applications for Rhode Island College. So I took it home and sitting there one night, and it says, Rhode Island College is an equal opportunity institution. We admit, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, how did they, I can't remember how they, it was prior convict status or something like that, or Vietnam veteran.
Wow.
So it was like we were a different breed, that we had to be slotted somewhere. Well, fortunately, I had access to General Salis's in his office at Rick. I went in there and I just went off my rocker. I said, what is this? Well, he had it taken out. Now, I haven't looked in the last few years, whether it's back there or not. But that's the extent to which society viewed the Vietnam vet. Now, a lot of us had good experiences. I didn't have, I've had people ask me about being a baby killer and stuff like that. But people didn't chase me down the street to beat me up or any kind of stuff like that. But I kind of hid. I'm part Native American, so I hid in my Native Americanness. I wore my chokers, and I wore my beads, and I wore my hair long. I hid. I hid until 1989 when I heard that we were going to war in Iraq. And my Marine unit was going to war in Iraq. And a bunch of us vowed that no soldier would ever go off to war without a send-off or come home without a thank you. And that's what I couldn't go to Iraq. I had open heart surgery, which killed me.
Carol.
Gail, I'm just curious, you said nobody asked you about your experiences when you came home. Did you want them to?
I did.
You did.
Especially my father. Especially my father was a flying sergeant in World War II. My uncle was wounded in Normandy. My grandfather was wounded at Saint-Mihiel and Chateau-Thierry in World War I. My other uncle was wounded in Korea as a Marine. Nobody asked.
Do you think they did it because they didn't want to upset you, or they were concerned about you?
Well, no, you know what I think it really was? What parent wants to know if their child killed another human being? I can tell you I didn't. At least I know, at least I'm pretty sure I didn't. I shot at people, but I never saw anybody drop, so I can live with that. I'm so fortunate with that. But I think that's what it was, so I don't hold any hard feelings against them for that. But it would have been nice to talk. And I didn't talk until 20 years ago when I started to create these courses. And it has been the greatest therapy I've had.
Have a question in the back?
Oh, I just had a question. I
Sure.
thought maybe, kind of pinpointing on what you were just saying, that perhaps they were leery of asking how you felt when you came back because they weren't sure of the types of questions to ask, especially when the peace activists were starting up in the mid to late 60s and seeing that on the television and then seeing the news footage come back 24 hours later.
Yeah, well,
They weren't quite sure on different fronts from World War II versus the front that you saw.
I felt very lucky that I served in Vietnam at such an early time that there wasn't all the garbage going on yet. I got out of Vietnam before the garbage hit. I happened to be at Providence College when the garbage hit. And that really drew me into my shell. And do you have another question, something?
Bill, Tom had mentioned this. You mentioned something about the draft and the lifers versus the people that were drafted. And I kind of look at the last 60, 70 years. Look at World War II, you had, I'm going to take two influential figures, the Kennedys and the Bushes. Very influential, but both sent kids to college. And then kind of like the Vietnam era, people were trying to get out of it, or people were going, in other words, it wasn't, hey, let's go to Vietnam. And now we have a volunteer army. And so we've gone that whole cycle. Can you make comments to what I just addressed in the draft? Should we have people being drafted? I mean, how do you people all feel about it?
Just personally, I mean, I don't think this should be a draft. I mean, I think that if you wanted to establish national service, like a 2-year commitment of everyone with the military being an option, I think that would that could work. But it's The country's changed a whole lot. The country's changed, and partly, in large part, because of the Vietnam experience. This is no longer the same place. We don't look upon military service in the same way as we did, like in 1940. And I don't think that we're ever going to bring. I'm going to say we're ever going to bring it back, but not in my lifetime, and I probably not in your lifetime either. It's like there aren't too many people out there who encourage their children, at least middle class people, let's say middle class, upper middle class, the wealthy, who encourage their children to go into the military. And that's just like not really done. And the thing is, though, I mean, the question the country has to ask, though, is if we maintain that, like what kind of military are we going to have? You know, if none of us, you know, send are allowed, you know, it's great to have a military, just somebody else's kid. You know, it's tough to run a country that way. Well, that's
rich families had to send their kids, so everybody felt the pain. Unless you know someone in these wars, you're not feeling this.
well. I mean, right. Like a lot of people say, like the Army and the Marine Corps have been at war the last 10 years, not the nation. You know, and in some ways that's true. But I mean, we that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. But at the same time, forcing people to do things they don't want to do, I can tell you from being in the Army from 69 to 71, that was not a way of doing things either. You know, you really had, a bunch of people that were very negative about everything, and it there was corrosion within the military, and the military took a long time for them to recover from that. They didn't get out of that probably until like shortly before that maybe probably the decade before the first Gulf War. And you know, when that first Gulf War went off and they actually went into Kuwait and all that and drove the Iraqi army out of Kuwait in a matter of days, I was sitting there like watching the TV. I was like, I was dumbstruck. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because I'm saying the army I was in would have been probably, you know, somewhere out in Saudi, like, you know, like going the wrong way half the time. It was not anywhere near as efficient at the time. By the end of Vietnam, beginning of Vietnam, it probably was a lot more efficient, and it certainly wasn't the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps was a totally different thing, and I think we can get into the PTSD and all that. I do think that people that were in the military, and I mean the Army side of it, had a lot more problems with that than the people in the Marine Corps side of it, because the Marine Corps has an esprit de corps, has a family aspect to it, and the Army did not have at that time. I think the Army has it now because of the volunteer nature of it, but whatever.
Thank you, everyone, tonight. You guys have been wonderful. I noticed your hat is West Point hat.
Yeah.
My son and my husband are actually going out to West Point in 2 weeks.
Oh, congratulations.
He's 10.
He's
He's 10. He has a very high interest in military service, which of course I have, as his mother, reservations for. However, it is something that we encourage at home. So take note of that there are many of us moms out there that are, as the generations are moving along, they're seeing wonderful servicemen, having opportunities to meet them, and are thinking of future lives in military service.
Well, if given an opportunity to expound on West Point, I will go off on that. My daughter graduated from West Point 2 years ago, and I mean, I think it's one of the greatest places on earth. And you know, it's not perfect, but it's as close to perfect as I've seen. It's a good place filled with very, very good people. And as a parent of somebody who's in the military right now, I was thinking about, you said like that they were keeping that TV off to spare you. I think they were sparing themselves as well. Like, I mean, you know, because the last thing I would want to see is what's going on. Like, you know, I just wait for the, whatever. I wouldn't want to know. Right now, my daughter is stationed in Fort Lewis, and so she's safe and secure as can be. And but who knows, like what the future holds. But yeah, I would encourage a visit to West Point. Take a look at it at least.
Right. Great place. He absolutely. We had the opportunity to meet the captain of the football team, so that's kind of how that facilitating itself. But in conjunction with the big read, he's read Shoot the Moon. Nice. He's read certain chapters in the things they carried, and so that he does not have a John Wayne view of what war is. It's completely, appropriate for a 10-year-old, but we're also taking some of the glossiness off of it as well.
Last night when I was, this was like when I was watching the Yankee game. Well, please. I mean, I'm sure you're all happy with the result. But anyway, like, since 9/11 in New York, they do, God Bless America, before the seventh inning, and they were doing it, and they were singing it. They brought in some Broadway person. She was at home plate, and she was belting it out, and the cameras in the place are now going around the crowd, and they hit on about a dozen West Point cadets, like who must have been holding the flag before, and the crowd just spontaneously burst into applause. And whatever.
All right.
I'm finished.
I have a question for Amy, from the middle school perspective. We have a grandson who's just fascinated, and Gil, this would be for you also. If any of your grandchildren, if you have them, are interested in your experience in Vietnam, but we have a grandson who's really enamored with the whole experience of his grandfather, and so interested in war, but in reading about different stories about the war and the whole sort of aura of it. But if you ever told me he was going, he would, he'd absolutely die. He would, he's just very timid. So I guess two questions. Did any of your family or your younger generation, Gil, take an interest in how you had served and in what war you had served? And also, as far as the middle school children, are they ready to serve, or would they want to serve, or are they just interested in the aura of war?
We actually discussed that. I'll talk just because I have the microphone right now.
I actually don't need the microphone.
We asked the boys who came, and it was all boys who came to the book discussion, none of them had that as their ambition. If they were drafted, they said if there was a draft, they would enlist before they were drafted. It wasn't their ambition, but they loved the strategy of it. They loved, they were, Monday morning quarterbacking type of thing with different wars. These particular boys, that's what they wanted. They wanted the strategy.
Kathy?
Don.
I was just struck by the age differences and what you were talking about with young people going to war and coming back, and that being able to let people know how they felt. And I remember I volunteered for the draft. My number was 73, and I went in 1973 for 2 years, but I went to Germany, and the Vietnam War was winding down. But I just remember that, and Tom, you're mentioning it, the 2S deferment. It was an art form to try to get a 2S deferment so that you could stay out of the war. And many of us would go to college until the last moment, and then finally I was out and I volunteered and I went in. And I wound up in a pretty good place. But I just remember all the turmoil in high school. I graduated in 1970 from Hartford Public High School, an inner city high school. And friends coming home from Vietnam, it was just a mixed bag because you didn't know. People had long hair, they were fighting, there was anarchy in the streets. I mean, there was a whole social turmoil that I've never seen before. And these guys were coming home from war, and it was just totally alien to them. And I just remember my friends talking to me, and who had just come back from Vietnam, and who had seen some really atrocious things. And they just couldn't relate. They just couldn't relate. And I know, Joan, you'd mentioned a statistic you saw that the average age of someone in Vietnam was 18 years old.
Actually, it's 21.
21.
Yeah. The myth is
in World War II, how old were they?
The myth is they're 19. They were actually 21. The average age of World War II vets was somewhere around 24.
Yeah. See.
26, which makes them a different. That's not to say there weren't 18-year-olds in World War II.
Right.
There were thousands of them. But the average age, when you look at the average age, it was 4 to 6 years older than the Vietnam era.
And I see my son who will be 23, and I look at him today and I say, how could he have gone to Vietnam when he was 18 or 19? you know, just, to me, still a kid. And so I have to imagine, to me, that young and being put in that position, just had to be horrific.
Right.
Well, it was horrific, but you did it. You know, when I went into the military, I wasn't drafted. I joined right out of high school. I was tired of high school and schooling and stuff like that. So, being the wise guy I was, I went in the military, and a year and a half later, I'm in Vietnam. So, what a choice that was. But anyway, I survived and made it. Nobody really asked anything about my Vietnam service until I started teaching this course. My brothers are very, very proud that I served in Vietnam, that I was a Marine in Vietnam. My 8-year-old grandson, the only thing he ever wants to be, for Halloween, he's going to be a Marine. That's what he wants to be. He wants to be a Marine. Their fishing hats are all the boonie hats that we carried in Vietnam. They have to have all one just like Papa has. So, yeah, it's there. But there was a time back when I joined the military, it was an honorable thing to do. And post-Vietnam, you were dirt if you were in the military. And what gets me right now, and I'm so proud of this, there are thousands upon thousands of young men and women in the face of the garbage that they have to face, in face of the terror they face, join the military on their own. On their own. And to me, that says, well, yes, the 60s and 70s ripped the fabric of America and it will never be the same again, but there is still, in our kids, there is still that goodness, that love of life, that love of humanity, that love of their country that they decide they want to serve. And that is it's a real moving thing for me, to know that, to know that.
I have really been wanting to ask this question of people because I'm a little more of the pacifist. And when I first met Gil and heard his passion about being a Marine, I have to say that's one area that has opened up for me. I have a tremendous more understanding and respect for the decisions that he made and why he made them. And the question I want to ask people is, and you had said this, that dishonor is the heaviest thing to carry. Is it possible to have completely different ideas about what is honorable and what is dishonorable, and still, I guess, accept and respect those different points of view? I think that comes across in the Rainy River, where you have that question, what is cowardice, what is courage? And I'm just wondering, as I throw that out, what people think. John?
Here's my question. What's tougher? Go to Canada or join? What's tougher?
Well,
What's tougher?
I guess
To me,
it's...
I have a good friend that went to jail. That was the toughest thing anybody could do. All I did was join, bingo.
Yeah. I think it
I
took
admire
courage.
him.
I think it took courage to do both.
Oh,
It took courage to do both
I
because
didn't know any better.
there were young men who went to Canada, and their World War II vet fathers said, "You can never come back to this country." And I can remember when when Desert Storm broke. At the time, my son was 2 years out of high school, and I was teaching at Rick. Driving home, and the radio said that we had gone into Kuwait. I immediately called my son, and I said, Gil, I would hope that whatever happens, you would honor your country. But whatever decision you make, I will still be your father, and I will always care about you. But in my heart, I wanted him to pick up the banner. I wanted him to pick up the flag. But I couldn't force that on him because it takes courage not to do that as much because of the ostracization that you're going to get. Like, if he went to Canada, or if he didn't want to serve, he might have had to face me. But he had to make that decision, and as a father, I had to swallow what I wanted for my son. what I thought my son should do, to follow in the footsteps of the Woodside family since the Revolutionary War. But that wasn't fair to him for me to do that. So I called him, told him I loved him. Whatever decision he made, I'd stand behind him. And that, that was hard for me to do, but,
Well, how about that chapter with Elroy, was that his name? When he's out in the boat? I mean, that to me is the decisive, when he's really struggling with decision.
yeah, but I think that's a part where he really tries to confuse you too. When he's out there with the old man. I think he really tries to confuse you because he's talking about Boker and Kiowa and the other guys when he hasn't even gone to Vietnam yet. He's trying to make the decision to cross to Canada. He's still in the boat with the old man.
John, I agree, that was a great chapter because it shows two sides of courage.
Yeah,
And both sides, both decisions are very tough to make.
It's such a wrestle.
It's a great chapter.
You know, all the words you keep using.
I love the old man.
Who?
Confusing
Yes.
and whatnot. That was the problem. It was all confusing, and when we were in Washington, we went to a lot of the war memorials, and Tom and I were both struck with how moved we were at the Vietnam Memorial, and not in the same way at the Korean Memorial and at the World War II Memorial. And we were wondering if that's just because it was our generation, or is because it was really more moving. And just hearing you talk now, it just struck me, the only other time I was ever moved like that was at a Civil War, like at Gettysburg or someplace like that. And it struck me that they were similar in some ways because they tore the country apart in many similar ways and confused everybody in many similar ways. And the country was never fundamentally the same after either war. I don't think that was the case after World War I and World War II and the Korean War. And when you talked before about that one chapter that made you think of Apocalypse Now, I thought that's what got me thinking of this, because what a perfect metaphor is. Apocalypse Now was taken from Heart of Darkness, and Heart of Darkness, it's like that was our Heart of Darkness for this country, for this generation anyway, the Vietnam War, when we all were so confused about what was the right thing to do, to go to jail or to go to Canada or to go to fight.
And from both sides, you weren't being told the truth anyway, so you didn't know it was. Let me ask you a question. When you were at the Vietnam Wall, did it almost feel like the ground was sacred?
We were almost shaking. I mean,
Yes.
just that you see in your own reflection, and of course, the fact that we know so many names on the wall is pretty shaking as well. But just the way it's set up, it's so simple, but that black marble, and you're staring into it, and your friends' names are up there, and you can see your reflection, and it's extremely moving. And it wasn't until this moment that I actually thought I had been moved in similar ways at like Gettysburg and some of the Civil War memorials, and never saw the real difference, because it really did change our country forever, both of those wars, in ways that no other wars ever did.
Right. And I think we healed a little bit more from from the Civil War than we could ever imagine of doing from the Vietnam War. Our social fabric was torn, our military fabric was torn, and our faith in our governmental system was torn.
Right, I think that fractured in more ways probably after Vietnam than anything else, and that's never been the same since.
No.
It probably would have been worse in the Civil War if there'd been TV during the Civil War. They would have screwed it up a whole lot more.
Well, we were
we can be thankful for that.
we were talking just before this happened that, can you imagine the day after D-Day on the 6 o'clock news, Walter Cronkite said, well, in Normandy today, 6,000 Americans were killed. How many people you think would be on the streets marching to pull us out of World War II? We got that in the Vietnam War. It's the first television war. We got to see what was happening. We got to see guys being loaded onto Hueys in body bags. We got to see the body bags come home. You didn't see that in World War II or Korea. What you saw from World War II or Korea, the guys getting off the troop ships and everybody waving flags at them. You know? I need to leave you with one thing. Fully 85% of all veterans that came home, Vietnam veterans came home to live a fairly productive and positive life. It's a myth that we're all nuts. I'm nuts, but I'm a good nut. You know, but most of us came home to live productive, positive lives.
We probably have about 6 or 7 minutes left, and I'm wondering if some of you would just be willing to give a 1 or 2 sentence response to what is the takeaway message for you from this book? Did you read this book and come back altered in any way? Did you change your mind about anything? Did it open up a door, which is really the focus of the big read, I think. One, to get us talking to each other as we have tonight. I know that some veterans' children have found this a way to build a bridge to conversation with their parents that has never been breached before. So I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but if you do have a particular message that you take home from the book and you'd be willing to share it, we're down to 6 minutes. So.
Well, I'm one of those. My dad had served in Vietnam. He had enlisted before he was drafted, suspecting that a draft would come his way. And he talks very little about it. He's a quiet person, and part of me wonders if he's quiet because of maybe what he had experienced in Vietnam.
That could be, or the fact that if you know, you would change your opinion, which he doesn't know you wouldn't, but, you know. The other thing is, what I find is vets will sit quietly and talk to vets, but they won't share it with you guys. And that's because it's safe. You know, no vet's going to point a finger at you. No vet's going to throw a stone at you, you know. And so that's the safe way to go. You know, there's a great poem, short story poem kind of thing about PTSD, about kids asking, why doesn't Daddy love us? Why doesn't Daddy go to the ball games with us? Why doesn't Daddy do this? Why doesn't Daddy do that? And when I first discovered that, my children were adults, my son and daughter. And I asked them to read that, and I apologized to them. Because I didn't know I was doing something different. I thought I was. But I had them read that PTSD poem. And I just said, I'm sorry for anything. So that's the kind of stuff you carry out. You know, my daughter had epilepsy when she was born. I carried that out from Vietnam. I took, you know, that was something maybe Agent Orange kicked on. So I carried that for years until she grew out of it. You know? So there's so many, you know, Tim says that the war never goes away. It's always there. It's always there.
I guess prior to reading this book, I always thought of the military service as a time sacrifice. You know, you take years out of your life, out of time with your family. And this book really, I think, made the impression that there's quite a bit of mental sacrifice as well. Your life is completely altered, not just the time that you may have lost from your family, but the different experiences that you will really carry for your entire life.
Your heart, mind, and soul are changed in some form or fashion.
I'll share something positive. Kathy and I were involved in sponsoring a Vietnamese family as a result of the war. In 1978, when everybody was sponsoring the boat people, I went to our pastor, and we had a great experience.
Right.
It was something I'll never forget. They came to Attleboro, they lived in the community, everybody supported them.
I know the church. I used to provide toys for them at Christmas.
Yeah, and we're still they're all in California now.
And they're thriving.
They're all in high tech, smart. They're as smart as
Yeah,
can be, and
yeah.
they're very appreciative. And it was the best thing we were involved with. It was all because of
True.
my experience of Vietnam.
And a funny part of that, when they first came, they used to watch American television to learn English, and one of the things they watched all the time was Gilligan's Island. So when they took American names, we have a Ginger and a Kathy. Actually, that was just from something else. But Ginger and I think Charlie was the other one.
Marianne.
No, Marianne. But yeah, we had to chuckle at that. They
No
were,
Gilligan?
No Gilligan.
It was a grandma. I'd like to make a comment on the way the book was written, regardless of Vietnam. I mean, regardless of the story. I just thought the book was written so well, as far as kind of confusing you, as Marion said so well, because I was confused. I originally thought that it was nonfiction until I got into it a little farther. But I just think it was very poetic in so many ways, and it was so philosophical. And it got you thinking, not necessarily about the war, but what are your own history? What are the things that you have carried all your life, that you carry now, that you're carrying into your future? There's so much a part of your life and your very own history, regardless of war. I lost the other thing that I wanted to say, but it was good. It was good. I mean, it was just so poetic that I loved the
Tim O'Brien would be very pleased to hear that, because he said...
Oh, I know the other thing was, he
Exactly
said,
what he
I
said.
want to write so that you feel it in your belly. I don't want, as you said, Marion, I don't want to just tell a story. I want you to feel it in your gut. And I think you really felt it. I mean, many times in that whole scene with the going down. But I mean, it was just, I just love the way it was written.
Yeah, it was a beautiful...
Very real.
Yeah, I agree. It's a beautiful, beautifully written book. And as I was reading it, I took notes, a few notes here and there, and I have like 2 pages of quotes of just beautiful passages. I mean, just on the top one, it wasn't a war story, it was a love story. There were just so many little sentences that just capture something and made me pause. And I didn't expect that in this book. Right? So it was the best of things and absolutely the worst of things. So
I thought that the first chapter was so effective. Initially, I started reading it, and I'm saying, oh, boy, this is, you carry this, and they carry that, and they carry this. And then all of a sudden, I'm saying, boy, this is kind of drudgery. And, you know, and you really started to get that sense. And then then we carry that until so-and-so got his face shot. And it's like out of the blue, out of this drudgery, all of a sudden, somebody's dead. Not only are they dead, but they're dead in this whole way in which you got insight into how they survived by sort of you mentioned before, it wasn't like trivializing it, but they use code words for it, sort of, you know what I mean, to make it less real. And then you'd go along, so and so and so, and then someone did this, and bam, and he fell like a rock. And that the crazy thing about the Indian, the Indian wanted to keep saying, he kept saying how he fell. He just fell. He just fell.
Bam! Down. He's dead.
Fell.
Right.
He just fell like a. And the one fellow told him to shut up, and later on he said, "No, I didn't want to keep the quiet. He didn't want to make him a quiet Indian or something like that."
See, I made an exact comment on what you're talking about. Bam! He's dead, and all that kind of stuff. And I know where Tim was coming with that. At least I think. It's the instantaneousness of death that happens in a war, or wounding that happens in a war, and it can happen in such an innocuous way. We had a guy wounded on the toilet. You know, he just went to go to the bathroom, and there was a sniper on the hill and binged him. Couldn't see where he was sitting, just took a shot into the canvas. But just like that, he was hit. So I think when he does that, he keeps that thing, bam, you're dead, down you drop, boom, ba-doo, that kind of stuff. I think he's all the time reminding you of the instantaneousness of death and terror.
And in some ways, too, the differences to prior wars, you know, you think about the Civil War. And so you line up 10,000 people, and you line up 10,000 people, and we sort of charge at each other, and 10,000 people, 100,000 people die. You know, and even in World War II, there was much more sort of organized major battles. In this, you're walking around and you're just doing
small ops war.
Turning this way and you're turning that way, and where's the booby trap? Where's the sniper? Where's the person who comes out of the village and pretends they're your friend and blows you up? And you know, so it was a whole really, really very, very different war and different experience as brought up.
Well, I think this is exactly the kind of discussion that Tim O'Brien has dreamed of and the Big Read has dreamed of. And I thank all of you, particularly my wonderful panelists,